Okay, David, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick introduction of yourself, introduce yourself to the audience. Who are you? What do you do?
I am David Weiner. I'm a filmmaker. I make long form documentaries. And these documentaries are about the horror genre, the sci-fi genre, and they covered various decades. So I've done the 80s, where I did a trilogy of documentaries, the In Search of Darkness documentaries, part one, two, and three. And then we moved on to the 90s. So I'm now doing the second half of the 90s. I just did 1990 to 1994. Now I'm on to 95 to 99. I'm in production on that. But the In Search of Darkness movies, and the sci-fi one I did is In Search of Tomorrow, and that was 80s. These are long form documentaries because, first of all, they're crowdfunded, so we're not limited by a Netflix or something like that saying this has to be a series, or this has to be 2.5 hours and then you got to cut it off. The people who give us the permission to make these things say more, longer, longer, longer. And they're long form documentaries because they very specifically go from 1980 to 1989. Now I'm in the 90s, the same thing. They go year by year, where within each year we talk about, I curate basically a number of movies, anywhere between 10 and 15 movies, where we have the people who were working on the movies. They were in front of the camera, behind the camera, actors, directors, composers, screenwriters, all that kind of stuff, as well as experts. And because you have larger context chapters in between each year, just by nature of the mathematics of putting this whole thing together, you fly past 4 hours. And so they're very digestible because they are structured this way. So it's your call if you want to sit and watch straight through or break it up.
So I want you to know that I love In Search of Darkness, the entire series. It is fantastic.
Thank
And I
you.
found so many new movies that I had never heard of that I'm so excited to watch. But let me ask you a question. What is your entry point into horror?
Well, I grew up a total monster kid, and it all comes from TV and books and magazines. It just goes back to like practically in the womb for me. I mean, I just don't even know. It's always been with me. So as a kid, I was the kid that mom said you're too close to the TV and your eyes are going to melt outside of your brain. Uh, you got to limit the amount of time you're watching it. But on the flip side, my mom and my dad also encouraged me to do something that I loved. And if I loved this stuff, they didn't say you can't watch it. So I watched the Universal horror movies. I watched Godzilla. I watched Hammer horror movies. I watched really bad Roger Corman movies, whatever came on TV. But even like the public library, we had a public library that I grew up near that I think it was every Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon. I can't quite remember. They would have a matinee where they'd show a 16 millimeter film. And I remember of the many times that I went that my mom would essentially drop me off so she could run errands. I saw Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. And by that time, I was so well versed with all the greatest hits, iconic monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, so on and so forth. The fact that you could have this hysterical comedic thing that would have all the monsters all together, that just kind of blew my mind. And it was just like, this movie was made for me. This is amazing. And also in that same library, I would go down into the children's section of the library, right to the movie section. And there was a mini monster movie section where they had these amazing Crestwood books where it would all be devoted to individual monsters. So you can get the Mummy version or the Wolfman version or the Godzilla version. And sometimes I read them, but every time I looked and pored over every single picture saying, have I seen this yet? I got to see this. This is on my non-existent list that I didn't know I had. that I cannot wait till I can see this. And that evolved to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. And then as I got older, Fangoria. I mean, my world was all about class. I did not call them horror movies. I called them monster movies. But I evolved a little bit, and then I'll just leave it at here. I evolved a little bit during, I'm a '70s kid and an '80s teen, and so in the '70s, the big movies that everybody talked about that were way too scary for me, and I wasn't old enough for: Exorcist, Omen, Amityville Horror, Halloween, of course, and so these movies everyone talked about them. And even if you weren't old enough to watch them, you would talk to your friends all about them. And if someone had seen it, you're like, tell us all about it. Spoil the whole thing for us. And, but those were the movies that I eventually would see when they'd come on television. And I scared the absolute crap out of me, but I forced myself to watch them because I was so curious. I had my grandmother knitted this Afghan blanket that had sort of big stitches and big holes, and I'd watch, The Exorcist every time Reagan would show up. I'd be like, "No, but I'm still going to make it to the end."
So you're an
And
eye person. I'm an ear person.
I,
It's the sounds that get me every time.
but that kind of was my invitation to the horror element. That there was, not just monsters, but supernatural creatures and devil worshippers and entities and ghosts and things that was even more scary, because none of these monster movies scared me. It was just fun. None of it scared me, but horror scared me. And that really sort of set me on my path to want to see more, want to know more, want to learn about how they made these movies. And a happy upbringing with horror.
I think you and I are a lot alike in that my parents as well just let me roam free in the horror section. And I'm very thankful for that.
It's a big deal, because there are plenty of parents out there who say this is bad. I'm going to protect you from yourself, and you can't see these things. And of course,
This
my
makes me want it more.
well, I think perhaps maybe subliminally my parents understood the psychology of you prevent your kid from seeing something that they're just going to want it that much more. But yeah, I just have to add a little addendum to that, is that the first time I saw Halloween, I was a latchkey kid. I loved my parents. My parents loved me. I had an older sister, but for whatever reason, I think I was 12 or 13 years old when the first Halloween came on TV, and I was all home alone. I don't know where my parents were. They just went out, and I just say, I want to stay home. Maybe I said, I don't even remember how it formulated, but I was like, I'm staying home and I'm going to watch Halloween because it's on TV. Okay, dear, have a good time. Trick or treat. They probably had no clue what the hell I was watching, and scared the living daylights out of me, but turned me into an obsessive to understand why I was scared.
I love that. So after making so many horror documentaries so far, has your perspective on the genre changed or evolved throughout this process?
Yeah, absolutely. My perspective on all these things has changed. It's evolved to a point where I went to film school. I went to Ithaca College Film School and made student films, and studied film theory. I balanced film theory and film production. And when you go to film school, you learn all about not only how films are made, but the theories behind, and the symbolism, and you instantly become enlightened. And then it's hard not to become a bit of a film snob, especially when you're surrounded by people who want to be cooler than you by saying, well, Spielberg sucks, but I'm a Godard fan, things like that, where people gatekeep a bit. And I always used to think, well, why can't I like both? I want to be able to do both. But I was a bit of a snob because that was the kind of way that everyone was behaving around me. So I felt like maybe that's what I'm supposed to do if I'm a student of film, very highfalutin kind of thing. But I just love movies, all kinds of movies. I loved experimental movies. I loved indie movies. I loved really well-known movies. I loved movies that were pretty terrible by all accounts, but they were still fun. Or there was something in it that said to me, this movie is not worth your time, but so I'm not going to recommend it, but I will go back because I want to see the special effects or the costume or the monsters, or I love the music. Everything was terrible, other than the music. The music was great. I want that soundtrack. And so cut to working in the film industry on movies myself, writing about movies, doing script coverage. I just, steeped myself in the movie industry when I came out to Los Angeles after I graduated from, in upstate New York. And the more you work on, say, low budget movies like, Full Moon Entertainment, I used to work for them, you realize, listen, it can't all be the cream of the crop. Here's hardworking people working very long hours just to get a film over the line. And if it hits or people have seen it, great. If it falls into obscurity, and I worked on many of those, it doesn't make the effort to make it any less it gives it no less merit. And so, cut to, I get to make these long form documentaries about movies, about sci-fi, about horror, about a whole decade where genre film really was just overflowing with creativity and ideas and just fun, absolute fun. And what I've learned, especially with the horror crowd, maybe a little more so than the sci-fi crowd, but essentially these movies collectively, I learned that these movies are more than just movies to people. They're experiences, they're memories. The movie doesn't necessarily have to be good. It's not like The Shining versus Chopping Mall. I realized everything is appreciated when it's on an even playing field. And I'm not telling you what to think. I'm getting the people who worked on these things saying, this was our struggle, this was our triumph, and this is what our product was. Did it hit? No, but it's kind of fun to talk about it 30 years later. And so what I realized with the horror community was these movies are the experience of seeing it, who they were with, what was going on in their lives at the time. Was it an escape from some problems that they had in their life and they got to see a movie? The movie wasn't that good, but the experience of getting away and seeing it with someone that they loved or cared for, that's the memory that's built around the time you saw, humanoids from the deep. We weren't allowed to see it, but we snuck, my friend's parents weren't home and he had cable. I didn't. Hey, let's watch this. There's like, these sort of, sea creatures, lots of violence and TNA. Oh my gosh, what a great movie. And it's so much better than what you would expect from Humanoids from the Deep. What a title. And so these are the
Let me tell you
memories.
that, yes, that movie was a lot more than what I was expecting, and I loved every minute of it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would.
Yeah. You could look back on it years, in a contemporary. And here's the thing with all these movies, with all these documentaries, I could look at all these movies with a contemporary lens. And I could say, Humanoids from the Deep is very rapey. It's a very much a product of its time. But it's not something that I believe should be canceled because it doesn't align with the way, whether it was the dialogue or the way people are portrayed or the sexual politics of a film. This is also a snapshot of an era, and you should not change or censor. You should just maybe a disclaimer if these are things that are hard for you to experience because things are very different now. But these movies meant so much to all of us, and if I learned anything, it's that even playing field nostalgia, but look at things through a contemporary lens, and but don't judge.
So, what made you venture into the 90s? Because for me, when I hear people talk about horror movies, the 90s is kind of like a lost era and not many people, it's not very many people's favorites. So why go into the 90s? Because you could have gone into the 70s. You could have gone even further back into the 30s and 40s, but
Hmm.
gone into the 90s. Why is that?
Well, listen, we're chipping away one decade at a time, and these films, these documentaries they could take a substantial amount of blood, sweat, and tears and time to get done. Yet we still manage, not including the development of the project, to turn them around within a year, more often than not. But it's a lot of effort, and what we do is when we make a documentary, a Creator VC and Robin Block, who's the CEO of Creator VC, executive produces all these movies. We have discussions about what would be fun to do versus what does the audience want. And when I say the audience, I'm just talking about our backers, the community. They're very vocal about do this next, do that next, and it was very the cacophony was pretty substantial for 90s horror. Now, other decades as well. There's plenty of people who say do not do 70s next, do 70s next, or why don't you go to the 30s and work your way up? These are all wonderful ideas. I am getting slightly grayer with each year as I do these things, but if I can keep on making these and it makes people happy, I think I'm going to keep on chugging along at least for a while. But the 90s, the call for the 90s was pretty substantial. And what we do is we survey our audience. So we create a treatment. We basically craft what the movie could potentially be. I outline it. I write it as sort of a treatment, and we put out a survey. We absolutely value our community, and so if we get a substantial amount of response and positive feedback saying, yes, I want this, and yes, I would pay for this, and yes, how cool would it be if this movie existed in the world, then that's kind of our green light. And there are a couple other things that we put out there where we're like, well, here's a different idea, and the response was, I wouldn't say a bad response, but it was arguably a little tepid compared to the power of some of the responses for some other things that people wanted us to do. So that kind of gave us the green light to do the 90s. And I'll lastly say about that is I think it's a bit of a challenge, to work to create a documentary that basically challenges people's expectations of what they think they know, because there's a mountain of really great movies and creativity. But I think it's also, if you look at the first half of the 90s compared to the second half, if you simplified it very much so, you look at the decade and you're like, well, there's Scream. Gosh, what else is there? Maybe Blair Witch. Yeah. The casual horror fan, or not even horror fan, but the casual person would be like, well, I can't remember anything. But if you go to a hardcore horror fan, they're like, oh, I could give you a laundry list of things just in the first half before Scream came and stole the spotlight. And as Scream was stealing the spotlight, there was so much other amazing stuff, studio stuff, borderline thriller horror, Seven, but it was still there. The J horror emerging to be an explosion at the tail end in the early 2000s. There's so much going on if you do want to pay attention, but here it's now my job to put it in perspective, create some context, remind you how cool and how great it was, and then you be the judge.
So when we think about 80s movies, that's a lot of practical, gory effects. The 90s comes and we see a really big uptick in computer generated effects.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, how does that shift in filmmaking technology? How does that change the tone that we're going to see now in this second half of the 90s?
Sure. Well, I covered it pretty, relatively thoroughly, as one can in a 6 hour survey of 5 years that is chugging along, trying to get to the next movie and the next chapter. But I put together a chapter that really kind of covered this in that it was really sort of the pinnacle, the zenith of practical effects technology, combined with this new brand new technology that it was moving from its infancy and taking its baby steps and then starting to walk and then run very fast, pretty much in a 10-year span from, the mid 80s to you get to, Jurassic Park in 93. And don't forget, of course, Terminator 2, you've got the Abyss. There are these elements where CG is we're in awe of what's going on. And even before everything was CG, just like creating characters and things like that, you had morphing, and I think everyone kind of forgets because this stuff is very dated now. So I think people say, "Oh God, it was terrible CG. It looks terrible now." How could people enjoy a movie? But at the time, it was brand new and it was a wow factor with so much of this stuff. Mick Garris, who used this everything from Sleepwalkers to The Stand to a variety of things that he did. When he did it, everyone said, "Holy crap!" They'd see these morphing characters and things like that they hadn't seen before. The only place people had seen it was T2 or a Michael Jackson video called Black and White, or Black or White, or is
Yes.
it Black and White?
I think it's
But
black or white.
yeah, Black or White, where you have this amazing morphing at the end where it's kind of like a Benetton variation of all sorts of people of male, female, skin tones, and it all just blends and it's perfect, and it's a wonderful experience that you see. And people all look at that and they say, "Oh my gosh, I want to do that too." People being producers and filmmakers. So long and short of it is that there is really great CG and there's really terrible CG. And the biggest problem with CG at that time, and this is throughout the 90s, especially where once everyone was adopting this as this is the better way to go compared to practical effects, is that no one has the money, no one has the time, and no one has the talent that ILM does to make a Jurassic Park, And so, but everyone says, well, we could fix it in post, we could do something, where we don't need practical effects and it'll be a wow factor, but I'm only going to do it for half the cost because I don't have the money and I'm a producer and I got to watch my purse strings. And so you really get some awful, 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 awful CG. But that shouldn't, all these movies are about looking at things from a new perspective. And you could easily look at a Ray Harryhausen movie like Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, or any of them, Clash of the Titans, Jason and the Argonauts. He pioneered and was an amazing stop motion animator. Willis O'Brien before him, with King Kong. These are time capsules of an era where people were wowed with those effects. And when I grew up loving and watching Harryhausen movies and monster movies and fantasy and all that kind of stuff, I never once said that looks fake and stupid. I just knew that it wasn't real, but I was still transported with suspension of disbelief. And I think in the context of a lot of these 90s movies, when you go look at these things, you say, yes, they're a product of their era, but if you're looking at only the effect and not the context of the scene and the sound design and the drama around the moment, more often than not, you're just going to say, well, this is crap and it's aged terribly. But if you watch the movie and it comes and goes, your mind says, well, yeah, that's an effect, but I'm caught up in the momentum of what's happening narratively. And I think people are quick to discount that.
Along those same lines, soundtracks and music. So the 80s, that's a lot of glam rock, that's a lot of synthesizers. 90s, for me, from what I'm remembering of the 90s, it's a lot of house music and
Mm-hmm.
music that you would find on like Dance Dance Revolution. Have you ever, which I love that game so much.
It's great
Have you ever,
exercise.
yes, it is. It is. Have you ever thought of doing a kind of retrospective on horror soundtracks in any decade?
Yeah, well, I actually did that in the first In Search of Darkness. And I also did it in Search of Tomorrow, where I had a whole segment talking about the music and what inspired the other composers and filmmakers, whether it's you name it, John Carpenter on synth or John Williams, with a perfect orchestra. Um, did that for horror. I sat down with like Harry Manfredini, who did all the Friday the 13th movies and, a variety of other things as well. It's very fun to be able to talk about this because everything from sound design to the music, when it really embellishes a scene and when it's better to be quiet and let the drama of the scene play out. And then you bring in the score to either goose or scare or enhance the emotions. Yeah, absolutely. For the 90s is something where um, I think, again, to simplify everything, when people think of the 90s, this is my perspective. Yeah, house music, absolutely. But I think people really just think grunge, and grunge evolved but grunge was such a massive thing. I mean, there's lots of rap and R&B. There's the house music. Even like ska came back, with a vengeance, so a lot of big band music. I mean, like Brian Setzer, who was doing rockabilly in the 80s, he's now doing big band versions of his Stray Cats tunes, in the 90s with the Brian Setzer Orchestra. Seek it out if you've never heard of it. But I think where it comes to horror movies in the 90s, the big trend really was actually these killer soundtracks that were basically just like launching opportunities for new bands and established bands where they'd sell, there was a Scream soundtrack, but there's also the Scream score. And so, and when Scream came out, the Scream score was not available. Just like one tune, one track by Marco Beltrami was on there. But, when Scream 2 came out, they're like, oh, well, we're going to release both now. But they wanted to have, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds with Red Right Hand. Everyone wanted to run into the record store or get your tape. At that point, it was getting your DVD, your CD, DVD, CD. You got your CD, or you'd rip it from Napster, right? And you'd put it on your mix. And so whether it's The Craft, whether it's Idle Hands, whether it's I Know What You Did Last Summer, this all kind of stems. He wasn't definitely not the originator, but I think Quentin Tarantino, with all his needle drops between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, all of a sudden everyone was racing to, because that was selling amazingly. So everyone said, well, I need like an Urge Overkill and some unheard band on my horror soundtrack. So it's played on MTV and it's played on your local, punk radio station or whatever you're listening to. So we could sell soundtracks and we can market this movie independent of the movie itself because you're listening to it and you're seeing it on MTV. And you might not even care what the movie's about, but it's got Oingo Boingo. It's got the Offspring. I want to see this because they're my favorite band, and I want to discover what else they've got because there's so many cool things on there. So there you go. Even like the faculty's doing covers of school themed songs. Pink Floyd, Brick in the Wall, and Alice Cooper and stuff like that. School's Out for Summer. All those things like that. Yet now they're really hard. They're all grunge, versions of it. It's a kind of a very cool time when you look at soundtracks that were orchestral. There were still plenty of those, but they really were overshadowed by this sort of brass ring grab for more money with soundtracks.
Are there any movies from the late 90s that you have forgotten about until starting to make this chapter in the series?
Yeah,
And ones that you like, before seeing it, you're like, oh, this is kind of whatever, but now you have a new appreciation for it.
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I need to jog my memory. It's like I have so many movies swimming in my head. Um, and what's cool is I have like the best homework in the world. I gotta, watch movies that I've either seen but haven't seen in a while, that I've heard of but then haven't seen. So I go, now I got to watch it and consider if this is something that should be included. And recommendations are like, oh well, you're going to do this movie, right? And I'm like, yeah, maybe. I've never heard of it. I got to put it on the list, right? Like everyone else, I kind of have my own personal, queue that I have to go through to sort of determine what's going on. If there are any things that I there were some empty movies on my list that I had never seen because I always scoffed at them on the video store shelves, and I'm just like, oh, this is straight to video. It never got theatrical release. I'm too cool for this. They're just trying to get my $2, you know. But I'd always pass them and I'd say, well, the artwork's great, or that looks funny, or oh, I kind of like the one person who's in there. But there were a couple that just never got me before we all moved on, and the video stores that we all thought were going to be there forever, all of a sudden it feels like overnight kind of disappeared. You know what I mean? Because they disappeared because we disappeared from the video stores because
Mhm.
we started watching streaming content. Or I just go straight to the warehouse or Tower Records or the local shop where I'd go through the used DVDs, and I'm like, I finally can get this and put it on my shelf. So I haven't given you an answer yet, but I don't know. I think I kind of feel
You're
like
stalling.
I'm stalling. I don't know. But another problem I have, it's a good problem to have, is it's very hard for me to single specific things out. And
I
I've
get
been singling out because I've done a couple other things lately where I talk about this one film, and I feel like I've talked ad nauseum about it. But um, I would say kind of the 1-2 punch of Jacko and Jack Frost. Um,
that. Oh, Jack Frost.
right,
We're gonna
right,
talk about
right.
that later.
Jack Frost is one that I dismissed constantly. I'm just like, this is goofy and forget it, not having seen it or even a trailer. And I never had a friend who just popped it on saying you got to see this. And when I finally got around, I was like, this is actually, it's not trying to be anything but what it is. And that's goofy and silly and over the top and quirky and has lots of personality. Uh, uh, I am a newly minted fan of Jack Frost because it's so ridiculous.
I didn't see Jack Frost in the 90s. I saw it relatively recently, and by relatively I mean like in the past 15 years or so. But man, that movie is one of my favorites.
Oh,
It's
good.
so bad, but it's so good. And like you said, it's not trying to be anything other than what it is, which is perfect.
That's the thing with all these films is there's no gatekeeping with us. We don't say this is bad. I mean, it could be bad, and we could say, well,
Bad
it's
doesn't actually mean bad in the horror community.
exactly. So you clarify your reasons why, and everyone has their own taste. But I think we're way beyond that kind of gatekeeping. I keep on using that word, but it's like it's something that you see online a lot,
Mhm.
and social media a lot. And I think some people are getting better, but I ultimately still all the time see people saying, "Well, I want to, talk about this movie that I saw, but don't at me, don't tear me down because it's not a great movie." And I'm just like, I don't write this. Sometimes I do though, but I'm like, don't apologize for your choice. There's the pantheon of what everyone kind of consistently thinks is great, but not everything's going to be Citizen Kane, and just enjoy what you enjoy and share what you share. And I find a lot of people who are fearless in sharing the goofy, the eclectic, the weird, the left of center. Those are the ones where I totally like zero in on. I'm like, ooh, I've never heard this one. Got to seek it out. And sometimes I really respect people's recommendations. And I don't hold it against them if it doesn't align with mine when I see it. And I say, okay, well, clearly they were smoking something that I wasn't when they saw this and they thought it was spectacular. I think that's the most important takeaway with all this stuff is that if they're fun for you and you really like it, that's all that matters.
if we're thinking about really big horror names from the 80s, so Jason, Freddy, the whole lot, who fared the best through the 90s, in your opinion?
Chucky. I would say Chucky. Jason was in Jason Goes to Hell, but Jason wouldn't come back until so I'm now gonna change my answer now that I'm talking about it. But Jason didn't come back until he went up again in the early, I think it's 2001. I could be wrong. Jason versus Freddy, Freddy versus Jason. Now Freddy Krueger, he was kind of interesting because they killed off Freddy early on in 91. No spoilers there. The movie's called Freddy's Dead, and on this day he dies. That's on the poster, you know. But then, and we all thought, well, I guess that's it for Freddy. But guess what? A new nightmare comes along. Wes Craven completely reinvents him in the most meta way possible, and it's brilliant, and it's really really good. So Freddy is really, he's up there. But Chucky, Child's Play came out in 1988, and Child's Play 2 and 3 were in the early 90s. And by the time 3 came out, 2 did really well. 3 was not very well received, and it was for a variety of reasons. And that's not necessarily fan, but that's box office, response and critical response. And so Don Mancini kind of circled the wagons, and said, well, I think we'll put this on hold for a little while. But then came out swinging in 98 with Bride of Chucky. And that talk about another meta movie. But that was the movie for me where I was like, yeah, Chucky movies are kind of fun. I see the humor and the fun in it, but am I the biggest fan of Chucky? Not necessarily, because I kind of I was sort of franchised out by the time the Chucky movies showed up. But my whole love of Chucky really started with Bride of Chucky and how clever and invigorating that was for a franchise. I was like, wow, you're allowed to do that, poke fun at yourself and also be really fun and also be just well made. My goodness, this is amazing. So that's the 90s in terms of the carryovers. Pinhead kind of had his struggles. The Tall Man kind of had his struggles. We'll throw in Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead was, he had blood wings, but he could not fly. Am I forgetting? Michael Myers. I personally struggle with the Halloween movies, which I've seen every single one,
Yeah.
but ever since pretty much Halloween 2 and Halloween 3, which of course only has Michael Myers on TV walking down the stairs, I've always struggled with this the hopes versus the reality every
Yeah.
time Michael shows up again. And that's all I'll say about that, because I love seeing these movies. I love when they try. I love moments of them. But I think I hold too dearly to my heart the experience of seeing Halloween on the first time ever, and nothing has ever quite come to match it.
I would agree with Michael Myers. I think his resurgence really comes with the 2018 version, and then it's great again. And that's all I will say about that.
Okay, fair enough.
So the 90s is a decade of meta movies, and we've seen in quite a few movies today where that's also a thing. Do you think there are any other trends from the 90s that will start showing up in movies today?
Yeah, well, I don't know about start showing up in movies, because I feel like just using your very specific wording, I think people have been absolutely mining the not only the 80s but the 90s films, maybe the 90s even more so, because the 90s films, especially by the end of the decade, were using, they stood on the shoulders of what came before them, especially in the 80s and way before. And so filmmakers not only talking about recycling storylines and types of characters, but just the filmmaking styles and what people respond to, and that just carries on. And you also have generational filmmakers who grew up in the 90s, as a a kid or a teen who now get to make movies, and they completely look back at these pivotal things that they watched that made a tremendous influence on them, especially in the 90s, and so they make movies now that are very much what they loved as a kid. There's lots of nods to that, whether James Wan is pretty much remaking 70s horror, and so on. In the 80s, Joe Dante, John Carpenter were making the movies they loved in the 50s. If you see a pattern here, it's there because these are filmmakers who they might be blazing new paths, but they're still not, very strong nods, if not completely wearing an influence on your sleeve or a direct steal because they know everyone loves it. They put it in their movies. So in terms of trends in the 90s, I would say one trend that I sort of recently kind of discovered, and when I say discovered, it was always there. It was always right in
It's
front of
just
me.
new to you.
But I just, part of my job with this In Search of Darkness 95 to 99 now, you're talking about the 90s in general or just the second half? But
Both. Yeah,
but
whatever.
I mean, I'm now focusing on this second 5 year thing, this second 5 year stretch, and I'm starting to notice more and more that there's, again, it's no revelation. You all have heard of this before, but action horror is really starting to come out more, and I think that's everything from an answer to to Aliens in '86. But everyone decided, there's the meta side, there's the really, really dark, straight horror of, J horror and a lot of indie stuff. But somewhere in between, there's more. You got The Mummy, you've got Deep Rising. Stephen Sommers did both of those films. You've got From Dusk Till Dawn, Robert Rodriguez. There are movies here that there's more, as just as much action as there is horror. And maybe the horror is tempered a little bit because the action is so strong. End of Days, by Peter Hyams. It's a Schwarzenegger action movie with explosions and lots of gunfire, but it's also the hybrid of kind of a Omen-esque kind of tale, with Satan coming back, in the form of Gabriel Byrne. And I did a recent rewatch of that. I saw that back in the late 90s, and I was just like, I think I dismissed it once again, being a little snobby. I'm like, well, I'm not too snobby. I want to see a Schwarzenegger movie, and I'm paying for it. But I was just like, I see what they're trying to do. They're trying to be Seven. They're trying to, Seven had a huge influence in how filmmakers crafted a world in their films, mimic Guillermo del Toro. They're like, make this like Seven, End of Days, make this like Seven, but with this other twist, Relic, all these kind of things. Relic isn't so Seven like, but it's still very dark and haunted housey. But I think Deep Blue Sea, a lot of these, even Anaconda. These movies are fun, entertaining action set pieces with horror elements. And while they may not scare you, they give you the thrills, right? And so I think that's, of several trends, that's one that kind of stands out to me more recently.
Okay, so we're gonna play a little bit of a game. I picked out my top 10 horror movies between 95 and 99. I'm gonna go through each one, and I want you to tell me one if you have seen it, and if you
Okay.
have, one sentence on what you think about it.
Wow. Okay. 10. Here we go.
10. Okay. First one is Mosquito from
Oh,
1995.
Mosquito. I've seen pieces of Mosquito, and Mosquito is super duper fun. I always have to remind myself that Mosquito is not the mosquito in popcorn. They film within the film from the 50s. But yeah, I've seen Mosquito specifically for amazing practical effects deaths with impalement by giant mosquito, whatever you would call it, Needle.
Yes, that's another one that again I'm like, wow, this is great. Why haven't I seen this yet in all this time? Second movie, The Dentist from 1996.
The dentist, the dentist. The dentist is something that I saw later. I have seen it. But that was one of those movies that I think I dismissed. After Dr. Giggles, I'm like, oh, they did Dr. Giggles with Larry Drake from LA Law. Now they're doing the dentist with Corbin Burnson from, LA Law. Who else are they going to get to play, the obstetrician starring,
I hope not.
someone from LA Law. Um, right. Yeah, the nutshell with that is I revisited it because it's Brian Usna, the director, and I love all his stuff, and it's always way over the top in a good way. And so much so that I invited Corbin Burnson to be in Search of Darkness 95 to 99, and he said yes, which I did not expect. And so yes, I have definitely seen it, and you guys get to see him talk about it in the documentary.
Well, I can't wait.
I'm not going to reveal too much talent, but I couldn't. I had to spill the beans on that one.
Okay, I thank you. I appreciate it. First to know. All right, Thinner from 1996.
Ooh, Thinner. Thinner's another one where that was hard to find. When I've seen it, and I'm a huge Stephen King adaptation fan, or Richard Bachman for in this particular circumstance. But and Tom Holland directed it. I love Fright Night, all the stuff. He wrote Psycho 2. He was in the first In Search of Darkness. But Thinner was one of those things where I was looking forward for it to come out, and it never did. At least when it did, it totally evaded me. For whatever I was doing in my life, I could never find it. So I had to catch it, many moons later. But I think it's very fun. Robert Burke gives a great performance through his fat suit, and despite maybe arguably its flaws, I think it's a fun one.
Uh, we can skip Jack Frost because we kind of talked
All
about it
right.
already, but just know that I really like Jack Frost.
Seen it, love it.
Yes. The Faculty from 1998.
Hmm. Faculty, I saw in the theater when it came out, having already been a Robert Rodriguez fan, having seen in no special order, but El Mariachi first, of course, Desperado, From Dusk Till Dawn. The Faculty comes along, and I'm just like, wow, this is look at this cast. Um, I think it had at the time the selling of it, written by Kevin Williamson, the guy who did Scream. So that was sort of a bonus, dimension. No, I guess pun intended or no pun intended. It was released by Dimension Films. But anyway, it's very fun, killer soundtrack that we already sort of touched on. But it's got a great sense of humor. It's super meta with its dialogue. Yeah, it's got a murderer's row of teachers, of actors playing the teachers. It's very fun, and I love Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I love Heinlein's The Puppet Master. So not to be confused with the Charles Band Puppet Master movies. So yeah, are these too long? My responses.
Mm,
There's so
no, no,
much to
they're
say.
fine. I'll allow it. All right, halfway through. Next one is Ring from 1998.
Ring,
And this is the Japanese version because I know a lot of people forget that, it was Japanese first. But Ring.
Ring. I absolutely love it. Seen it, champion it. I'm actually starting to think now, as we are talking, literally, I'm trying to remember if I saw the Gore Verbinski remake first or if I saw the actual Ring first. And kudos to you for calling it Ring versus Ringu. Everyone calls it Ringu, and that's absolutely fine. It's just pretty much like the nickname of it,
Yeah.
but that it's literally called Ring. It's not the Ring, it's Ring. But Japanese, the translation to Ring, they say Ringu, and that's what it ultimately became. But it's a fantastic movie. I think a lot of people who have not experienced J horror uh, from the mid to late '90s when it really started to pick up and gather steam. Ring was absolutely influential film on a lot of other Japanese filmmakers as well, not to mention America and Hollywood paying attention to that movie and wanting to do insane ghost stories just like that because it's bonkers when we get to the end. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Have
I
you
mean, sorry, I apologize, but there's there are three people listening right now who have yet to see it and probably don't know much about it. So just see it and understand that it's a slow burn. Watch it with the subtitles. Enjoy it because it's a great character film and it's a mystery and it's creepy as hell.
have you read the books by Koji
I
Suzuki?
I have not. I have not.
I highly recommend at least read Ring. Now, of
Hmm.
course, Ring is a whole series because it's a whole series of books. At the very least, I highly recommend reading Ring because it gives a lot more. There's so much more to the story that we are not getting,
Oh, okay.
even if they did put it into the movie, which some of it is there, it's in no way translated through the movie. You need to read the book. There's so
Very
much
cool.
more story there.
Thanks for the
All right.
rec.
Yes. Urban Legend from 1998.
Urban Legend saw that in the theater when it came out. I saw everything practically, but that's not true. There's so many, if you look at how many movies were made, there's an incredible amount of Swiss cheese holes in my, film viewing filmography. But Urban Legend is one of those things where I saw it because that's what we were being fed, in the post Scream world and the I Know What You Did Last Summers and the, all the Craft and all the sort of these teen driven movies that were coming out that were slashers. Or I was like, yeah, Urban Legend, absolutely, let's check it out. And I watched it. It was fun. I did not guess who the bad guy was. I'll just leave that there. And I did not use Noxema acne pads for the longest time after that.
No one should be using those anyway.
Right? Anyway, that's a layered reference that's not only dated, but you probably have to look it up now.
Hello, editing Celia here. I am realizing I totally forgot to talk about Deep Blue Sea from 1999. It's about these scientists that are testing sharks to help fight Alzheimer's. And we have Samuel L. Jackson, who gets eaten by a shark. We have Stellan Skarsgård, who gets thrown into a glass wall. And then LL Cool J survives to the end. So I just want to point that out. That's also one of my favorites. Two more. House on Haunted Hill from 1999.
House on Haunted Hill. That is a movie. Yes, I've seen it. And that's a movie where I think by that time I quite appreciated the original William Castle movies and how goofy they were. I think when I saw those as a kid, like, oh, there's a skeleton, or oh, lots of talking. Where's the monster? Or Vincent Price. I will watch it. Oh wait, they're all they do is talk. For me, when I saw a lot of these things just on TV as a kid, I was biding my time till the monster or the creature would show up. So it wasn't really until later that I learned about the Tingler and House on Haunted Hill and William Castle being the great showman and making an in theater experience to get people in seats regardless of the ultimate quality of his movies. And so when they remade House on Haunted Hill, that's another one where you could even credit Seven as an influence, at least in its opening credits. But the filmmaking, this is William Malone, right? Bill
Yes,
Malone.
with Dark
Um,
Castle, which
yeah.
is funny because from William Castle.
Right, right. Yeah, Dark Castle, for those not in the know, was Sam Raimi and was it Zemeckis? There and Joel Silver. There were a bunch of people who got together and teamed with the family of William Castle, and they created Dark Castle to remake and make updated versions of their movies. They didn't do a lot, but they did do some. And It's another whodunit. It's very high tech and low tech at the same time, which I think is a kind of a hallmark of the era where people were recognizing that you could find horror and it doesn't have to be in an old haunted castle. You could have, crisp technology and high tech and very, upscale homes, with technology, but you could still have that dingy basement down below where bad things are happening, and some of it's real, some of it's not. We don't know what, and that's all I'll say. But yeah, I enjoyed it.
House on Haunted Hill had an effect on me, and to this day, it's extremely frightening to watch.
Tell me,
Yeah.
single out if you would, one or two things that about it that frightened you.
Well, I think everyone goes straight to I forget the character's name, but the one that's always with the camcorder because she used to be like a TV personality and she goes into
Yep.
the basement and sees through the camera that there are a bunch of nurses and things, but she puts the camera down and there's nothing there. There's that scene, but I think that just general I don't know what the effect's called. I know they use it in Jacob's Ladder, but speeding up all these rapid, yes, exactly that. It is frightening.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I saw that movie a little bit too young, but that's fine.
Well, that's great. We all have that movie or a few of those movies where we all saw it way too young. Our first thought is, how did our parents allow us to see this? But ultimately, yeah, that's great. I love that. I love that this is a movie that like got you, you know.
Yes. Yes, it definitely did. And actually, here, I went to a convention and I got Jeffrey Combs. You can't really see it on here. Jeffrey Combs to sign my DVD.
Oh, Jeffrey Rush.
No, Jeffrey
Oh,
Combs.
Jeffrey Combs. Sorry,
Yes,
you're
who
right.
plays the
I
doctor.
forget he was the doctor. Sorry, two Jeffreys in
Yes.
there.
And
And yes,
he
yes, yes. Very,
he
very
made it
cool.
out to me and he said, the doctor will see you now.
Nice.
Yes, that's
Very nice.
the cherry on the cake. The last movie is Sleepy Hollow from 1999.
Oh, Sleepy Hollow.
The Tim Burton
Um,
Sleepy Hollow.
yep, yep, yep. I was first in line for that. A as a Tim Burton fan, and it was but B or sub A. I've been a huge fan of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Washington Irving tale, which I read, but of course I first saw it by way of Disney.
Yes.
Disney's animated Legend of Sleepy Hollow, part of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, double feature kind of thing. That is one of, talk about like kinder trauma. I love that. I loved Halloween already, but here was a spooky thing where I remember seeing, I think probably saw it, the Wonderful World of Disney show that they had on Sunday nights. And they showed that, and whenever the headless horseman showed up with his laugh, and just seeing Ichabod as frightened as he was, and his horse was frightened, made such an indelible mark that I've been obsessed with Sleepy Hollow, the story. In fact, I grew up kind of near the town of Terrytown / Sleepy
Oh,
Hollow,
really?
so I've been there, and I just consider it Sleepy Hollow still exists. But Tim Burton taking it on, and I remember that my first thought was when I saw the casting, and I'm just like, wait, handsome, rugged, good-looking Johnny Depp is going to be ugly, awkward Ichabod Crane. How are they going to make this work? I already, without seeing a frame, need to really suspend my disbelief. Wait, Christopher Walken as the Headless Horseman? How are they going to show him? He has no head. And Christopher Walken, he's like, I'm gonna go. I don't know. I will stop before I start. My really bad Christopher Walken impression. Anyway, long story short is I really loved it. I thought it was amazing. I enjoyed how it was a throwback to Hammer horror films and Tim Burton's love of Hammer horror. And they did turn it, Andrew Kevin Walker, that script turns it into something that's, more a bit of a Scooby Doo mystery. but I think it came off really, really, really well, better than I had expected, especially I kind of thought, how exciting is the Headless Horseman after you see him? He just chases and laughs and he has a pumpkin. Is he going to swing a sword? Like everything was relevant to what I thought it would be based on the Disney version. And so I found it to be wonderfully terrifying and bloody and heads
Yes.
rolled. And
Yes.
they did not pull punches in that department. And so I loved it.
All right.
See,
Now,
it's hard for me to keep these things short. I think the shortest one
that's
was
okay.
Mosquito, but even
More,
that,
yeah. More is better. And I appreciate every second of it because I love to hear people talk about movies that I have also seen. Because a lot of times it's I've seen all these movies and I have to tell people about them.
well,
Or they're
that's good though,
asking
because
me and then maybe they don't see it, maybe they do. Who knows? So
you share your enthusiasm, and if they ultimately report back saying, oh, these days all I say is, if you don't know a thing, don't look at the trailer, don't read what it's
yes.
about, just go in blind and let it unfold organically. And the other thing I usually say is it's a slow burn, or if it's not a slow burn, because I often add that little, asterisk, because a lot of people are like, oh, gonna
Yeah.
go get some food and popcorn break and
But if
look on
you
my
go
phone.
in knowing that it's going to be like that, it goes over more smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. Good old fashioned patience. It still is in all of us if we tap into it.
So back to In Search of Darkness, 1995 to 99. Um, Promo. What tell us about the pre-order? Where can we see this when it comes out? All the good stuff.
Yeah, well, we are Creator VC is a indie company where we make, manufacture, and distribute ourselves. And then the best way, because we're currently in production on In Search of Darkness 95 and 99, is you go to 90shorrordoc.com. So 90s, 90shorrordoc.com. Between now and June 9th at midnight. We do these short window pre-orders where this is your opportunity to jump on. And the reason why you would pre-order it is you get your name in the credits. You get to follow along on the production until the movie comes out, where we interact with everyone and we share what's going on, and we take your feedback and that kind of stuff. Normally that lasts a little longer. This time it's a shortened window because we're intending, unless the Headless Horseman gets to me, or Sadako,
I think it's Sadaka. Well,
Sadako.
anyway.
Unless the girl from the ring comes out of my TV and yanks me away, we're intending to get this movie done by the end of this year. And those who pre-order it will be able to see it first digitally, and then in the December or January, once we've manufactured the disc, it's a Blu-ray, you get it yourself. And what we do is we pride ourselves on real good quality physical media that you can put on your shelf, but you also have your name in the credits, which is super cool. You get all this great swag. So if you go to 90shorrordoc.com, you'll see this is a collector's item. If you missed the first part at 1990 to 1994, you can get a copy of that. You can get a version in its wonderful slipcase where you can get the whole 90s together in the two parts. If you missed the 80s and the 80s trilogy, you can get that as its own case. You can get, if you have no room for any of this stuff, you can get it as digitally, individually, or a digital bundle. We've got amazing posters. I've got posters of these movies. The art is spectacular. The newest one, we do two. We always do the kid in front of the TV with the horror icons around him, but we also do one that's much more colorful, Easter eggy, and that's by Dave Morrell. He outdid himself this time around. You got to go check that out because it's a high school hallway with 1,001 Easter eggs. Maybe not that many, but it feels like it. But it's really, really cool. And I think it's indicative of the quality and care and attention that we put in all this stuff. These are labors of love. If you want to support indie film, you pre-order it. And, the pre-order goes until June 9th, 90shorrordoc.com.